Welcome to the Buddhist Insights of National Development, a special program that is being aired to you today. Now, we know that there are many types of development paradigms. Some of them are older, have been better, but are less popular, and there are some which are more modern, which are very popular but have proved to be less effective. Some of these development mechanisms have been based on economic theory, and some of them have been based on spiritual practice. We are going to be looking today at some of the ways in which the Buddha's teachings can inform future development paradigms in Sri Lanka primarily and the world secondarily. Now, we are very clearly cognizant of the fact that the Buddha did not have a social agenda, as evidenced by the fact that he was reluctant even at the start when he attained enlightenment to inform the people of his spiritual attainments. And subsequently, he only talked to individuals individually and responded to questions asked by groups of people who came to him for instruction. Now, if he did have a social agenda, he would have created a model for the world and said, this is the perfect model for the world, and then he would have gone around preaching about it, which he didn't do. But despite of the fact, we know that discerning people have been able to extract very strong ideas on how the world can become a better place through a development process that is collectively satisfying and not necessarily individually electrifying or ecstatic. And today, to discuss this matter of how Buddhism can inform national development, we have a very, very august panel with us. We have the Venerable Vajrarame Jnanasiha Thero with us, and he is a well-known Buddhist scholar and writer. And we have Professor Mohan Munasinghe, who is the chair of the Munasinghe Institute of Development, and he is also a Nobel laureate because he was a member of the IPCC in 2007. And we also have Professor Claire Brown, who is from the University of California, and she introduced the first degree program in Buddhist economics in the USA, and she is a practicing Buddhist. Now, to start off the proceedings, I would like to ask a question of the Reverend Thero. We have many interlinked crises that affect the world. We have the food crisis, we have the energy crisis, we have the climate crisis, we have the financial crisis, and each of these, either collectively or singly, can bring the world down. Now, how does Buddhism offer solutions to the idea or the problems of national development from a Sri Lankan perspective? And how can it be, or can it be thought of as a religion for the world?
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. As you said, the world is in a crisis situation now. And I would say that this crisis situation arose after 200 years, after the 1815. So the thing is, we had the Industrial Revolution in 1815. And after 200 years, we see the impact or the effects of the wealth of nations, that concepts that were there, that was developed in a I would say, I don't want to bring out religion, but that was a Christian type of, thought process. And that was the, all our economic theories and everything was based on that system, that model, which later developed, later on into different paradigms. And the concerns, if you are taking some of these concerns of poverty alleviation, hunger, all those things were concerns of the Buddha also. True enough, the Buddha, his main purpose was to show a way to inner happiness or personal happiness. And that's what it is. And when there is happiness in individual, there is happiness in the society also. Because if all we think of the community of monks, they're happy because, they follow a particular path. as I said, say poverty alleviation, there are so many discourses of the Buddha which is on this particular thing of how poverty could be alleviated. More production is what is stressed in some of the suttas, more production. But the production should be dhammika dhammaladda, it has to be righteous. And the effect should be, not only that you have to produce, but what you produce has to be of use, of benefit to the people. And if it's not beneficial, it's not just pure production, demand and theory, demand, that type of thing, but it's production. Say poverty, and also when you think of hunger, when a person who was hungry came to the Buddha, he said, please feed him first. Because and it's mentioned, jiguccha parama roga, that is the biggest roga, that's the disease that we have, is hunger. So with hunger, so that's one of the first things that we should have in any country, in national development. There should be that hunger. There cannot be any hunger. There will be so much, and the effect, the economy, the environment, everything affects the hunger, and that should be a paramount importance. So these are concerns. What I would say, environment degradation. That too, in sense, as a monk, we are not expected even to pluck a flower, or even the concern for environment. We have to respect the environment. We use of it, but we can't even dig the that's for the monk. But the thing is, without digging the soil, we can't cultivate. But that's for the layman. But thing is, his concern was that. And as we know, when we want to do our meditation, anything like that, during the time of the Buddha, the discourses are aranyagatova, that is in the forest, rukkhamulagatova, or under a tree, or sunyagara, or empty place. So these are places where I think the Buddha was very concerned with the environment, and we have heard that he was born and then became enlightened and everything under a tree, and he was a lover of environment. And I think these are things that we have forgotten in this new paradigm. And so that's one thing I would like to say about development. I have been, in my lay life, I'm the president of the Dharma Vijaya Foundation. And then we are in our Act of Parliament, we incorporated, we spoke of a total development of man. The whole purpose of that foundation was to have total development of man, inspired by the Venerable Madhya Panyasiya Mahanayaka Thera. And what is the fourfold? He says fourfold development: economic, health, education, and moral development. And I always find that we have developed certain criteria, to test or to measure in economic development, and also education, nutrition, and health. But there is nothing on moral development, and that's why some of the biggest problems that we have is sustainable development. If that is what we want, how can we? It is something like pouring something from above, and there are so many holes within, and it pours out. And the thing, if there is alcohol, tobacco, your consumption habits, why is it that there was a United Nations Convention 2011, on health, on non-communicable diseases, all the countries? Because, many people die. Even in Sri Lanka, 60-70% people die because of non-communicable diseases. These are non-communicable, but are communicated by other type of vectors like companies and even personal development. So these are extremely important, and for any kind of development, it's extremely important that the person, it has to be with the development of the qualitative development of man himself. And without the qualitative improvement of the human being, it's not possible to have any kind of sustainable development as I see it.
Thank you, Reverend Thero. I think it's a very good segue into this discussion. Primarily, I think by what you're saying, we are looking at righteous development, and that is equitable, that is fair, and that it is something that has a positive impact on the people of the earth, the plants, the animals, and the earth itself. And so we are looking at a very holistic mechanism if we are going to be able to sustain anything we do, not just development, but anything. And righteousness, as you say, is something that is very steeped deeply in morality. And so I think that would be a very good place from which to start looking at building up a new paradigm for the country to develop itself. And Professor Munasinghe, I would just like to ask you, as you have been very involved in at the global level in bringing and highlighting these issues and making the world sit up and understand that we have a serious problem on our hands in terms of the survival of the human race itself. What do you think about a new development paradigm? Do you think it is important that we have a new development paradigm today? And if so, what is wrong with our existing modalities of development? And if there is something wrong, how can a new development paradigm actually change this towards the better?
I think it's an excellent question to follow up on the Reverend's reply. Let's start with what is wrong with the world today. And I'm not going to be judgmental and blame anything or anybody. I think people can judge. I mean, use the words of the Buddha, ehipassiko. You come and see, and you make your own judgment. We have reliance on unrestrained market models. This is the dominant paradigm in the world. But we can see that business as usual has failed us. There are problems of poverty and inequality. There are problems of shortages of food, water, energy, and so on. There are environmental damage. There's wars and conflicts. And certainly climate change is around the corner, which will make all the other problems worse. Right? Now, if you look at how these come together, I'll give you a simple example. There is a concept called the ecological footprint of humanity. This is a collective burden that the human race puts on the planet Earth. At the moment, we are consuming 50% more of the planet's resources, water and the like, soil, than the planet can sustainably support. So 50% overconsumption. Very soon, in a few 10 years more, we'll be consuming 2 planets worth. Right? So we are over-consuming already. If you look at the pattern of consumption, you see that 85% of that consumption is done by the top 20% of the richest people in the world. So basically, the rich are already consuming more than 1 planet's worth. And at the same time, we have all these pronouncements from world leaders saying, oh, we are going to raise 2 billion people out of poverty. And it makes them very uncomfortable when I say, if the rich are already consuming more than 1 planet, where are the resources to raise the poor out of poverty? So already we are in a bind. And to take matters further, if you look at the responses of world leaders, if you look at the economic crisis, the 2008 crisis, which started with banks and big companies. Now, very quickly, the world's leaders found $6 trillion, $6,000 billion to bail out these banks and other institutions. Why? It affected the rich. If you look at the social, so that's the economic problem. The social problem of inequality, the 2 billion poor people, we devote maybe 100 million, which is 1/60th the other amount, for aid to the poor. And if we look at the environmental problem, like climate change, we are putting maybe a few $1 billion. So the priorities of the leaders are reflected in that you solve the problems of the rich first. And if we go on like this, then it's very clear that we are going to, business as usual is not going to work. We have a failure of leadership, and I will talk later about possible solutions, but it has to be bottom up with individual, family, community, city, country, and then the whole world. We have to get business and civil society to work with governments, because governments have failed to solve the problems as they are. And last but not least, we have to go to measurement of well-being particularly, which go beyond just the material consumption, right? because
Absolutely.
people are trained through advertising and other things to believe that the more they consume, the happier they must be. But we all know that there are other things that generate happiness. And so this consumerism and the thrust for pure economic growth, neglecting the social and the environmental dimensions, is what has caused the situation in the world today. Business as usual simply will not work. And in my next question, I will answer how we can solve that.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I think that you're right. We are looking after the rich at the cost of the majority poor. And even in fact, actually, the financial crisis of 2007 was when the nuclear debt failed. And that nuclear debt was in the hands of ordinary families. And subprime mortgages just failed. And that brought everything down. And the deadly part of this whole process is that, as you rightly point out, governments have failed in their primary mandate to look after a nation. They are looking after a very specific segment of a nation, and that has been the boomerang effect. And we have ended up with an overshoot days, I think in August 21st or something like that right now. So we are actually consuming far more than the planet can regenerate in a year. And so in that respect, we might want to consider the fact that established ideas of quote development unquote are actually retroactive, that they're actually sending us back. And since most of these actually came out of Western thinking systems, I would like to just ask Professor Claire Brown the question. So do you think that the West is actually the developed world? Do you think that there is a better way of approaching development other than the way that has almost become part of our genes now in terms of the classic economic theories of the West?
It's a great question. It's actually the main question to ask right now around economic growth, because the Western world has had enormous economic growth, and we've had three major outcomes. One was a lot of income with a lot of consumption for many people in the developed world. The second was enormous inequality within the developed world, but also globally. And the third was we're killing our planet. So out of those three outcomes, one might call making life better. But the problem is that making life better was focused on consumption. So economic growth was measured as income, and consumers and citizens all thought, how do I know if I'm doing better? Oh, well, I'll just look at my income and see what I'm buying. See how fancy my house is, how fancy my car is, how much stuff is in my closet. And then when I'm feeling like, what's the meaning of life, and I'm not feeling very happy, what do? We run off to the shopping mall and buy more things. And the first thing we learn when we start to practice Buddhism is that's not how to be happy. And so if you step back and say, well, how do we create a meaningful life? It means we have to really rethink what economic growth means. And right now, the planet's telling us if you don't think about it very quickly and you don't heal Mother Earth and all the beings, then life as we know it won't continue. So yes, we have to rethink economic growth, and certainly the world can no longer follow the pattern of the Western world in what development brings us and how we live. It's a big issue.
It's amazing because, as you said, because of the fact that we have this thinking in our heads that we can make life better because we have more with us and within us. That is the problem that we are going to be constantly facing, because that is being drilled into the people through advertising, as Professor Munasinghe pointed out. Every day, it's a very difficult habit to break, and we are in a place where we are in a habit type of situation, asavaka. So the habit that we are in is actually what is causing us to sort of barrel down that road to doom and not even believe that there is an alternative. And moving from that habit, or breaking from that habit, is probably one of the greatest challenges that human beings as a civilization is ever going to face, because it has taken hold of us so fast. And we will try to look at mechanisms of try to break out of these habits in our next set of questions. And for now, we will take a break and go back to the studio. Welcome back to this special program on Buddhist insights on national development. We are now at a juncture where we have to ask a set of fairly important questions. I will once again ask the Venerable Thero. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, what would you think is the purpose of development? And in terms of growth, why grow? There are various definitions for this word growth, and not all of them have led the world to a good place. So the question is, why grow? And what is the primary purpose of life in terms of that growth? And what has the Buddha's teaching got to offer us in that respect?
One thing that there's a wrong belief that Buddha Dhamma or Buddhism is for the other world.
Okay.
The Buddha Dhamma and the Buddha, in all his teaching, he was thinking of human development for happiness. The final goal was happiness. And even say when you take the final, say Nibbana, Nibbana is not for the other world. You attain Nibbana and enjoy that Nibbana in this life itself. So this is something that we have to be very careful, because certain people used to say that Buddhism cannot offer anything because Buddhism is for the other world, not for this world. But actually Buddhism is for this world. Now take a very simple thing. It's out of development. Now say taking loving kindness. In that particular discourse there were 10 important effects, in the sense benefits of loving kindness. 10 of this world. Only one that you will be born in a different place, in Brahmaloka or something, but all are of this world. You can sleep well, you can, there is no stress. All the problems that we have in humanity or human society now, where the doctors and other things, with just loving kindness, spreading that loving kindness you can. So this is why I mentioned even earlier, if you just think of the material aspect, with economics mainly deals with the material aspect. It's not possible to have sustainable development only by thinking of the materials and creating that type of demand and supply and demand theories, whatever is said. So it is extremely important that we think of the human being, because finally it's the human being that we are working towards, or this planet. And Professor Munisingh was mentioning that how we are consuming, that overconsumption. Now those are things that we in the new concepts, in the new world, we are forced to do that. And I think Buddhism has an answer, because this country has a history of 2,500 years. I don't think there is any country in the world that has a chronicle of such a long period. And just even before the Christian era, the type of development that we had, the Tang culture, the Dagaba, Chaitiyas, all those things are, it's development. And we have that development in a Buddhist model. Because when Asoka brought Buddhism to Sri Lanka, Devanampiya, and during that time, the monarch Devanampiya got the title Devanampiya. Even Asoka was Devanampiya. He is a lover of gods. And how is it that by leading a perfect, virtuous life and not over-consuming, giving back to what you give. The whole concepts are this. The thing is, say, take what I see the 3 S's in Buddhism. Now, even contentment. Now, the contentment also is misquoted and misrepresented. In contentment is not just I have got this, I'm happy with this. That's not. You have to work hard and earn, and what you earn, you have to be content with that. When you get something, you be content with what you have been got, just not getting. You have to work hard for that. The word that he used, I'm quoting this Pali just to say that these are not new things. He says, Seda Vakita, use your Seda is your perspiration. With perspiration, work hard. and then get and be contented. If you are not content and if you want to compete with the other person, if you are not happy with what you are getting, but always looking beyond and say, what is the other country doing? What is this man is doing? There is no happiness, no contentment. So the first thing in a Buddhist economic national development, if you have the paradigm shift, we have to have the contentment, santutti, paramangdana is this thing. And then not only santutti, then he says subhara in that same, the current name is so easily supportable. You know, a person has to be easily supportable. A family has to be easily supportable. The country has to be easily supportable. It's not something where you create demands through advertising and others, and where it's the whole economy develops on trade and business and like that. So the whole, it has to be where people have to be with contented, and then have to be subhara, that's easily supportable, and also a simple life. The simple life. You know, the thing is, it's interesting because with this 2,500 years history of this country, this country with the treasure of Buddhism being here, we can offer to the world. And a small country is a small country, and we can experiment rather than ape in the West. What has happened in our country is that our economies go to Harvard, go to all those countries, learn those theories, and come back and try to put all those back into our. We can't do it. We had universities. We have developed certain universities. We thought that there would Buddhist economics be taught, and there will be so many papers on that. I'm happy to see Professor Claire Brown, from Berkeley University, who has, lectures or who has a chair on this aspect. But Sri Lanka is still trying to ape the West. So if you want to have national developments, go to your roots. 2,500 years we have been living in this country, and we have had a very, very rich culture. We can offer that. Go back to that, do the research. And how is it? We call it the Dagaba and the tank culture, but whatever it is, it's prosperity. And what is important is prosperity. And we have a glimpse of that from Bhutan when they were speaking of GNH, or gross national happiness, because that is what is required. The disparity now earlier we had 1:4, but now the disparity may be 1:6. Between the poor and the rich. So what is all these things? So I think if you are thinking of development, if you want to make Sri Lanka a happy country, we have to have a paradigm shift, not in the world, but locally also we have to think, then we could have sustainable development. Because we have to have that, and education, advertising, everything, because human nature is such that we have to educate the human being, our people, and so show them what's happening in the West. And then what has happened? And do you want to go on that path? Or do you want to have inner peace and happiness, sustainability, and everything in our growth? And growth is what is important. Development is always. We can't just wait on ground. We have to develop. Human beings have to develop. And development is there. The environment changes. The important thing is the environment has changed, but the human nature is the same. The tanha, the greed and everything, those things that was tackled by the Buddha a long time ago, 2,500 years, they are the same in the human being. The human nature hasn't changed. And that's the change that we have to bring about gradually.
Thank you, Reverend Tharo. I heartily agree with you that santutting paramang danang, the greatest wealth, is contentment. And moving a person away from the tanha factor or the greed factor to the santutting factor or the contentment factor is very, very crucial. And we cannot do that by, as you rightly point out, aping the West or trying to superimpose economic mechanisms and theories and systems from outside of this country upon a socio-cultural system which is based on a very deep spiritual understanding of what life is. And in that sense, what we would like to see is that growth in itself then has to take on a different type of meaning. Growth cannot then be defined in terms of gains or greed or financial metrics. There is a greater identity of growth. And in terms of that, Professor Munasinghe, how do you see new economic or new development paradigms identifying this idea of growing? Is it something that you have to do in a material way, or do you have to like eschew yourself, move away from that and get into a more wholesome and holistic way of looking at the idea of growth? How do you see that aspect of it coming through, in terms of an economic model?
Well, let me pick up on a point that the Reverend made, which is greed and the individual. Because I think the Buddha in his wisdom preached to the individual. And my belief still is that change must come from the bottom up. And we have to understand the message that the Buddha gave, which was primarily for spiritual enlightenment, to achieve enlightened vision, but it has an implication for our mundane world. And this is very important. These are parallel tracks. You advance spiritually, and then you find that your behavior in the mundane world is not in line. So as you become more advanced as a spiritual individual, that parallel track, the other track becomes parallel. And then the world becomes a better place. Now, how does this happen? Well, you start with the greed, that even the Nama Rupa Baddha, so to speak, which drives every human being in Buddhist theology, is the creation of, in a sense, the tanha and the greed, the vibhava tanha from the previous birth, and then the implantation of the ajiva, the nama in the womb, the creation of sense organs for sensual gratification, the birth of the child, which is at that time completely autonomous. I mean, you have the breathing, the blood flow, the intake of food, the excretion, totally autonomous functions. But within a few weeks, you see a superstructure forming, the non-existent self that the Buddha taught about. And you see the baby's toys, the baby's parents, and you begin to acquire. You even become a professor, you have children, grandchildren, cars, TV sets. So you have, in modern psychology, this is called the self-referential loop. The self, which is driven by craving, is self-created. It is a swayam-yojana, and it is obvious. But we now have blown up this ego, this persona, into a thing. And the gratification through the consumerism and other things that we talked about, this ego becomes a monster. And that is the source of all the problems we have in the world. When you try to gratify your own needs at the expense of others, you have conflict, you drive other people into poverty, you have inequality, you abuse nature. So all of the problems start with that individual. And this is where the Dhamma has a very important impact. Now, I think the message for the rich is also the message of G&H, because being rich and powerful does not mean that you have eliminated suffering. You have enormous mental anguish. Will I lose my millions? Will something else? Will the stock market crash? So they are not free of problems. So we have to say that more consumption, more wealth and more power is not the only path to satisfaction. I agree that if you are poor, your basic needs must be met. So we have to raise the poor out of poverty. It is nonsense to say they can be spiritually advanced if they are starving. But once you reach a sufficient level of consumption, then other things come in. The social, your family interactions, the social milieu, the environment that you have, those things also contribute to happiness. I'm very glad to say that I worked with the King of Bhutan on their task force on gross national happiness, and this bringing in other indicators to supplement just the GNP so that we have a more holistic definition of happiness. That is also extremely important, otherwise we are trapped in this paradigm which actually satisfies the ego. We are trapped in a false paradigm that more consumption, satisfying the craving of the non-existent self, is the purpose of life. and we have to break out of that with new values.
Absolutely, sir. I think the Buddha is very clear on that as well, because he ties greed to suffering directly. Yayan tanha pona bhavika nandiraga tatra tatradi nandina sayatidan kama bhava vibhava tanha. So it's very clear that he has tied suffering to greed and lust, and in our modern world, greed and lust have become values. Greed is good was one of the big ones in the past, and that kind of brakeless steam engine is like thundering down the tracks to doom, and it's taking us along with it. But I think Sri Lanka has a unique ability. I think that Sri Lankans, we may look and sound poor materially, but nobody in Sri Lanka has died of starvation. Nobody has been refused a piece of fruit if he wants it, or a place to stay, or a roof over his head, or clothes to wear, or a smile for his mind. That as a culture, as a Buddhist idea, we have been very, very powerful with. I think in terms of the giving index of the world, we are, I think, number 5 or number 7. So we are capable, and we have the mechanisms, and we have the spiritual basis to move forward in the direction that you're telling us about. But we have this overarching, very powerful market force that is insisting that we move away from what is a beautiful system into something that is extremely nasty and self-serving, and in the end self-destructive and destructive of nations and peoples and planets. So in that sense, I think Sri Lanka has a very powerful message to offer the world in terms of the practice of Buddhism over the last 2,000 years, and how it has managed to keep this country relatively happier than most other countries, despite of the problems that beset it. So it is just simply a matter for us. It's not that hard, I think. We can just move it from there on to the next level, and I would like to see what Claire has to say in terms of trying to move that idea, that identity of an economic outlook based on Buddhism into the mainstream.
So I think that's a very complicated question, but let me just start with mentioning a few things and echoing what I've been hearing also. Sri Lanka has done well in providing health care and education more generally, although there is a problem of malnutrition among certain children here. That percentage is actually much higher than I think most people would like. So we need to make sure always that everyone has all the basic comforts of life with food, clothing, shelter, water, health care, family, community. And that's the start. And that's where the government comes in. The government's role is to provide the basics and to provide a supportive system for human development for all people. So that's the role of the government. But the government can't make you happy. So then you say, well, now what's the role of the individual? And the role of the individual is, as everyone has put it so beautifully here, the role of the individual is to live mindfully and to live in a way that it shows that they're totally interconnected with all other beings and with nature, so that we live a life of loving kindness and compassion, both for other beings, but also for Mother Earth. And so for Sri Lanka, I think that means when we think about what do we want in our next step as we grow, where do we want to go? Do we want to really see that I want to have a big car and that everybody needs a big car so that they can be interactive and have fully developed lives without everybody driving a car? And we want to rethink how to get around, like with fast trains instead of massive highway systems. So the role of the government, I think, on the one hand, is to help change the way people think about what's possible in an economic system and how to live both in community with each other and with the environment. And so Sri Lanka has moved ahead in a lot of ways, and they can jump over a lot of the problems that the West created with gasoline cars, and everybody can, there's a wonderful study out of Stanford that Sri Lanka can be carbon-free using mostly wind and solar. And it's a great state everyone should look at, and the government should be helping putting solar panels on all rooftops of all companies and all homes. And moving ahead in ways like that, where with guidance from the government and some subsidies and help, then Sri Lanka could actually move ahead in a beautiful way and leapfrog a lot of the development problems that the Western world has had.
I think that is excellent, because I'm very glad that you said that, Professor Clare, because I think subsequent to COP21, the government made some very firm decisions, and they made some very clear directives to the people that they were going to go the sustainable route, that they were going to make sure that the country was not going to be excessive in its use of resources, that is going to tap into the massive renewable resources that are available in the country, and make sure that the country's resource regeneration process is brought to another level altogether. And I think the President made that commitment at COP21 itself, and he brought it back here, and it's, I think, entirely in line with what you're saying. So from an economics perspective, I think we're quite good on that. And on that note, thank you. We will go back to the studio for a break. Thanks. Welcome back to the special program on Buddhist insights into national development. And we have had 2 rounds of very interesting idea exchanges. And we are in the final stages of the discussion, where I would like to see some final comments being made on how Sri Lanka can move forward. And in this respect, I would like to ask the Reverend Thero, what do you see as being a sound system or a good system of trying to change the moral environment of the country towards a Buddhistic type of thinking, which is going to help with the development paradigm of the country?
I think, there is a particular statement of Venerable Matiya Panyasiya Thera, which is often quoted by the politicians, by the President. I have heard the President and others, everybody, ministers also. Miniha nohada rata hadanna be, minihat hada ganimin rata hada ganimu. If I translate that, it is not possible for development without concentrating on developing the man himself. Human qualities have to be improved. And let's, in our paradigm, in our development program, let us develop both the human qualities along with the development of the environment. But the material development should come along with the development of the human qualities. And if you are thinking, what are the human qualities that we are thinking of? There is, again, and from the Buddha, I would say, loving kindness. We speak of reconciliation, we speak of so many problems and other things. Loving kindness, spread compassion. The third most important, altruistic joy, not competition, this type of thing, altruistic joy. And upekha, the equanimity. Now these are qualities which are called Brahma Vihara, or the noble living, because if you want to have a good society, that society should have as a base a moral base, which are the 5 precepts, which is for all human beings. We can live like in the past. I can remember, like in the past, we need not have walls right round. It's an open, environment. We can just go out without closing even our door. The neighbors will look after. That was the type of world that we had. If you read Robert Knox, the type of Sri Lankan society, how much of togetherness was there. What has happened now? We have to bring those back. And it's here, I would plead, with Professor Munsingh, who said that he has assisted the Bhutan to have developed the, GNH. Let's from our own cultural, insights, let us have this type of criteria. In fact, we have criteria, as I said, for economic development, we have certain criteria, and for say health, we say what is your lifespan and that type of thing. If you say 75, 80, now that's high. and then we have education, literacy, all those things. But again, for the quality of human being, we have not. So let us develop these things. Let us have those, and let those be in our development goals. And then with the national development, we can bring about. Because this country is still very good. You know, we don't have earthquakes yet. We don't have volcanoes. We have a good, you know, and then we could do this type of thing. So let's hope that this particular meeting will be of some use for this country.
First the man, then the nation. Attaya hitaya attaya sukaya, bahujana hitaya, bahudan sukaya. From there we go on to very quickly sum up from Professor Munasinghe. Professor Munasinghe, what do you think of the modeling that we can use in terms of trying to make this happen positively inside the country?
Well, I made a very modest contribution towards a type of economic development model. It's called Sustainomics, which is more aligned with Buddhist thinking. It was presented in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit more than 20 years ago. It's taught in many countries and it's been applied practically. What are the principles? First is empowerment of the individual, because as the Buddha said, we are responsible, we are accountable for our actions. And the law of karma ensures that. But it means that instead of waiting for our leaders, for presidents and prime ministers and others to tell us what to do, we know what to do. When we leave this room, we switch off the light, we turn off a tap, we plant a tree. So empower the individual. I call it making development more sustainable, step by step. The second principle is the Sustainable Development Triangle, which I proposed also. From the economic side, we are not talking about being poor and starving. No, we have to have a prosperous economy, but it must be built more on cooperation, not the cutthroat competition that capitalism teaches us, a different way. From the social side, we have to, as I said, empower people, but also have practice inclusion and other things, which in the last year or more in Sri Lanka, that is the trend, okay, which is pretty good. And third, but not, we have to have respect for the environment. So basically, I think we have to change values in order to do that. And we need also to work with other stakeholders, government and civil society work with government. We have to make sure that we think in terms of long time spans, okay, sometimes centuries. And we have to also think in terms of the planet, not only our own backyard. So we have to expand the boundaries of the mind in the mundane world as we expand the boundaries of the mind in the spiritual world to achieve enlightenment.
Thank you very much. And Professor Clare, I think depending on the actual reality of this happiness that we are talking about and the contentment of sustainable development, places like Bhutan, Sri Lanka may not always be as happy as we would like to think they are. So what do you think? Do you think we have a qualification there that we need to make?
I think Sri Lankans, if they hold on to their Buddhist values and understand that happiness comes from living a mindful life, relieving suffering of others, and really working with your own true nature and appreciating every moment of life, which is very precious, right, then they have a lot to build on. And if we can just get the Western world, which is what I'm working very hard on, to change their behavior so that they quit thinking that economic growth is just more income and more consumption, and they focus on shared prosperity around the world, then maybe the Western world can quit tainting the behavior of the rest of the world, and we can share resources globally in a way that we begin to heal the earth and heal all beings. But Sri Lankans are wonderful people, and they have a giant step ahead with their Buddhist values in creating a Buddhist economy that's good for all people and all beings.
So thank you very much to the panel. Professor Munasinghe, Reverend Gnanasiha, and Professor Clare. We have had a very insightful, I would say, discussion, which is actually, I think it's basically a trigger discussion, a discussion that we can take forward in terms of what we are going to be doing as a nation, as a peoples, into the future in Sri Lanka. And hopefully we can create, with your help as well, a very strong model for sustainability, which we can practice it here, and we can also give it to the world. I think Sri Lanka has that ability to do that. It has the ability to be able to be a role model if it only makes sure that it is capable of leveraging its existing energy, its existing strengths, instead of trying to muddy these with, as the Reverend pointed out, various other externalities which have been coloring the system and destroying some of our primary values. And towards that, I think this discussion has been extremely helpful. And on that note, thank you for watching, everybody, and we are going to wind up for the day.